Hello. Thank you for joining us tonight on the Lessons of Vietnam show. We really appreciate you tuning in. Without you, there wouldn't be any reason to have a show. Tonight's show is another controversial figure. Lady Jane Seymour Fonda is who we're going to be talking about tonight. And I hope you learned some things. She is blamed for things that she didn't do, but she did enough on her own. Uh, let's get started with the how to see the show and so forth. We're telling the story of the Vietnam Wars. You can see there the men and women trying to get rid of some of those many myths out there and the half truths. I am your host, Bill Dixon, Vietnam veteran. I was there in 67, 68 during the Tet Offensive. We're broadcast courtesy of worldwide headquarters of Nissan Communications, located in Raleigh, North Carolina. If you have something you would like to comment about the show and you need to talk to me, you can send me an email at dixonbill80@yahoo.com. To participate during the show, if you have something you want to say or make a comment, dial in 919-518-9773. That's 919-518-9773. I'm going to take the call and ask your question or whatever you have, a comment that you have. Or even better, go to Skype, Computers 2K Voice, and do the same thing. Just log in, give your name on the login so he can say that Bill had a question or whatever. Right now with the pandemic going on and so forth, and you never know how to dress, there's a lot of veterans out there in crisis, being in quarantine. But if you're a veteran, know a veteran, please pick up the phone and call one of these numbers. There's somebody there 24 hours a day to talk with you. So there's help out there. I know it's easy to feel alone. I'm a member of a veterans group. We meet every Tuesday. Lately, I've been doing it by Skype. So reach out if you got somebody there. As you can see there, Lady Jane Seymour Fonda. The left picture is her as Barbarella. The middle picture is one of my favorite. That's one of the urinal stickers you used to see down in the urinals quite a bit. And then the other one, Hanoi Jane, where she got her name, is first domestic terrorist. And she had quite a life and quite an experience. She went through a whole lot, but we're going to get right into her story. On 21 December 1937, Henry and Frances Fonda welcomed their first child, a daughter, who they named Jane Seymour Fonda. A family legend said that the daughter had the blood of famous Lady Jane Seymour. She might have been famous, but I never heard of her before. The spouse of British King Henry VIII, and she was named in her honor. That's Henry and Jane's mother there. You can see in the picture, Jane and younger brother Peter had to grow up very early. They were on their own mostly when Henry found her constantly busy on set and their mother either suffering from depression or partying her days away. It has been said that she had 9 abortions before she was born. Her mother was never there. She was in and out of institutions, and Jane didn't understand as a child why. Frances Fonda suffered from depression throughout her life, and her marriage to Henry Fonda was tumultuous. Jane Fonda suffered tremendous guilt over what had been her last opportunity to see her mother when she was 13 in 1950. Coming home for the day from one of the institutions, Frances asked for her children, and Jane was so mad at her she didn't go downstairs to see her. Peter went. Jane didn't, and her mother left that day, returning to this institution and cut her throat. Told that Peter or Jane knew nothing about what had happened for a while. They were told that her mother died from a sudden heart attack. They learned later on in the year from a magazine story that what had happened, and both Peter and Jane had a lot of difficulty adjusting to the information because they always thought she'd had a heart attack. Jane Fonda has had tremendously insecurity her whole life. She had self-image issues from the time she was a teenager from her father, who always talked about how important looks were. And a lot of that insecurity is what drove her into bulimia, the eating disorder. Fonda attended schools in New York and Vassar College, where she immediately went wild. Thereafter, she engaged in a whirlwind of studies and affairs in Paris and New York. Her first stage appearance was in 1954, but she did not seriously decide on an acting career until 4 years later while visiting her father, who lived next door to Lee Strasberg. He was the director of the Actors Studio in Malibu, California. Strasberg accepted her as his student, and she paid for her acting lessons with a brief but successful modeling career, and that's her as a model there. On August 14th, the actress married her first husband, Roger Vadim, a French producer, screenwriter, director, author, actor, and artist. At their wedding ceremony was a lavish affair which took place at the Dunes Hotel in Las Vegas. Fonda recreated herself as a type of sex kitten under the direction of her husband, French filmmaker Roger Vadim, as we said. Jane's new look was more evident in the 1968 fiction tale Barbarella. How many out there have watched Barbarella before she became Hanoi Jane? In addition, Fonda won her Best Actress Academy Award for 1971, the movie Clute, alongside Donald Sutherland, Roy Schneider, Charles Cioffi, Dorothy Tristan, and so forth. Jane's marriage to Roger Vadim lasted for 8 years, from 1965 to 1973. But Fonda played the role of a perfect wife with delight, running errands and pretending to share Roger's views on free love and participating in his orgies. Let me read that part to you again. Share Roger's views on free love and participating in his orgies. He used her to go out and bring people in. The couple had a daughter named Vanessa Vadim, who was born on September 28, 1968 in Paris, France. In 1973, Jane ended her marriage and divorced Roger. After Jane decided to leave Vadim, she looked around for a worthy cause. It was Marlon, I can't even read or pronounce today. It was Marlon Brando who pointed her towards the American Native Indians, who were complaining of discrimination. He also suggested she check out the Black Panthers, who believed in combating police persecution with violence and revolutionary action. That sounds familiar. Jane was immediately excited and eager to speak out for both. She flew to San Francisco to support the takeover of Alcatraz, a former federal prison that sits on the island in San Francisco Bay, that the American Native Indians wanted to turn into a cultural center. Far from helping, Fonda was creating problems. Furthermore, they didn't want to be identified with a star who seemed out to get publicity for herself. She called her own, instead of letting Indians be involved, she called her own press conferences and so forth. Finally, an Indian leader quietly informed her that she couldn't be their spokesman. So the Indians fired her. After being dismissed by the Native Americans, she switched to the Black Panthers. For them, she opened up her checkbook, paying a $2,000 phone bill, lending them her credit card, and posting bail for Panthers who'd been arrested. The Panthers promptly charged the card to her Visa card, then lost both the card and the card. One of them skipped town after she'd stumped up $50,000 bail money. After she heard the Panthers were calling her a white hunky bitch behind her back and spreading false rumors that she was sleeping with their leader, she moved on to look for another cause. Fonda's support and fundraising for the often violent Black Panthers, including her relationship with Panther leader Huey Newton, which led the FBI to place her under surveillance. Meanwhile, many differences with her father became public. He had always been a liberal, but he was not as far a liberal left that she was. Henry sympathized with many of her works, but emphatically, emphatically rejected her methods. Jane, in turn, rejected his idea that changes could be effected by electing the right officials into public office. That is one of the Black Panther flyers you see there. Move on over, or we'll move on over you. After the Black Panthers, Jane needed a cause. What next? Convinced she'd found a new mentor, Jane started pursuing a married political activist who was working with soldiers against the Vietnam War. Shortly, Frank Gardner was her lover and giving her a crash course in the issues. In March 1970, she embarked on a lengthy tour of Army bases and reservations. Jane was constantly being arrested for trespassing on Army bases. By mid-1970, she was nearly broke, having spent thousands financing her trips and her causes. It's sort of relaxing to be poor, she told her friends. Strapped for cash, Jane agreed to be in the 1971 film Clute. She also started sleeping with her co-star, Donald Sutherland. Together, they formed a political vaudeville show called FTA, slang for, F the Army. Across the country by then, both were under surveillance, so they talked in code. But you see one of the flyers out there. If you were a veteran, you got to go to one of their little plays they put on. But if you just walk in off the street and you want a veteran, they ask you for a $3 donation or so forth. There's Jane with her after one of her arrests in Cleveland. As her activities increased, so did government surveillance, grow to include at least 6 agencies at one time. Upon returning from Canada, Jane was infuriated when U.S. Customs in Cleveland confiscated containers of what they thought to be drugs. They proved to be vitamins and non-prescription food concentrates that she had used for weight control. Now, she always felt that it was a plan concocted by President Nixon to punish her for her anti-war activities. FBI agents opened her letters, tapped her phones, and even planted a story that she wanted to kill the president. Her FBI files later extended to 22,000 pages. Of course, Jane didn't help her cause by declaring publicly that what Vietnam really needed was a victory for the Viet Cong, the Communist Army fighting U.S. governments over South Vietnam. In other words, she was saying that the bad guys, not the Americans and the South Vietnamese, but the bad guys need to win. One of her ideas was to dress anti-war protesters as dead Viet Cong fighters in white makeup and black leotards, and to demonstrate on the lawn of comedian Bob Hope, who had been entertaining U.S. troops for years. Jane split from Sutherland, saying she was moving into a different phase of her life and she couldn't share it with one man. There were soon rumors that she was having liaisons with various activists. She supposedly confided during a feminist conscience raising, "My biggest regret was I never got to Che Guevara." By 1971, her tour of left-wing politics with her endless marches and violent arguments had left her drained. At this point, Tom Hayden, in baggy trousers, his hair in long plaits, entered her life. Already a hero of the left, he participated in a violent student strike in Columbia University in 1968 and helped plan the riots at the Democratic Convention in Chicago that summer. After Jane had given an anti-war speech, Tom Hayden came backstage and she was hooked. A week later, while visiting Jane in her home, he lambasted her for her superficial sexiness that she showed in Barbarella. After agreeing with him, she began to cry. Within days, they were lovers. From the very beginning, she was consumed with anxiety that he might think her an elitist, not least because she had a swimming pool. She sat at Tom's feet literally, remembers a fellow pacifist. She looked up to him like he was some sort of a god. Tom and Jane named their son Troy after Nguyen Van Troy, a Viet Cong martyr who attempted to assassinate U.S. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara before wisely changing it to Troy. While in Norway filming A Doll's House, she announced her plans to divorce Vadum and married Tom Hayden, one of the Chicago Seven, arrested for protesting at the 1968 Democratic Conventions we talked about. That's Tom and Jane, you see in the picture. Fonda and Jane wed the following January, forming a union that would loom large on the socio-economic landscape for the next 2 decades. They produced the 1974 anti-war documentary propaganda film, Introduction to the Enemy. They formed IPC Film, which fellow activist Bruce Gilbert, and produced Coming Home, The China Syndrome, 9 to 5, and On Golden Pond. Tom Hayden, a left-wing activist, took complete control. He forbade her to have either a wash machine or a dishwasher. Not only that, but made her sell her home in Las Vegas and buy a shabby 2-bedroom shack in Santa Monica that smelled of mildew, where the couple shared a mattress on the floor. She couldn't even wear her Cartier wristwatch anymore because Hayden disliked any insured possessions, so she'd replaced it with a cheaper time hangings. Hayden had a fantasy of becoming president of the United States, and Jane was determined to make him famous. Once, when she did something that displeased him, she received too much attention. He forced her to discuss her shortcomings in front of him and other friends. He wanted her out there, but he didn't want her to get more attention than him. To raise money for Hayden's left-wing political activities, Fonda opened an aerobic studio and produced the 1982 Jane Fonda's workout video, a bonanza that whipped Americans into the 80s fitness craze. They also mobilized young Hollywood, using their house as a political mix and mingle center, and turning their Santa Barbara ranch into an enlightening children's camp. With Tom Hayden's support, she decided to go alone to North Vietnam in July of 1972 to collect evidence that the U.S. was deliberately bombing the river dikes. Now, I'll give you an example of what she was talking about there. Hanoi, which was the capital of North Vietnam, was kind of like New Orleans. It was down below sea level, so they had dikes all the way around the city to prevent the water from coming in. And at one time, there was a discussion about bombing the dikes exclusively, but they decided it would kill too many North Vietnamese people, civilians, and so forth. So they really didn't want to bomb the dikes specifically and wipe them all out. Horrified by the devastation, when she got to Hanoi, she saw places that bombs had hit. She asked her Vietnamese host if she could go on radio to make an appeal to U.S. bombing pilots. I appealed to them to please consider what you are doing. I don't think they know, Fonda said at a news conference when she returned home. The people who are speaking out against the war are the patriots. She was basically telling the pilots not to bomb, to refuse to order, and so forth. Critics decried Fonda's exaggerations of American atrocities in Vietnam, which the supporters admitted were inflated. Her supporters admitted it was inflated. Many were astonished when she spoke as if she had visited Vietnam and witnessed the horror she described. This is before she went. Ultimately, supporters arranged her to go to Hanoi, which we just talked about. When she publicly denounced American involvement there, she was labeled a communist and Hanoi Jane by many back home. The State Department rebuked her. Letters of protest filled newspapers. Now, at least one congressman demanded her arrest for treason. Yet Fonda seemed unperturbed by it all. It's like she had this protection all around her. Fonda was wasn't deterred. She continued to openly to question accounts of the U.S. government and American POWs who told devastating stories of the torture they were enduring at the hands of the North Vietnamese. Her famous picture on the anti-aircraft gun in Hanoi. She said the radio addresses were the only way to get access to the American soldiers because she was barred from meeting them at the bases in South Vietnam. And this is something she wrote. What is a traitor? What is a patriot? Was her angry retort. I cried every day when I was in Vietnam. I cried for the Vietnamese. I cried for the Americans too. She was taken to visit defense installations on the outskirts of Hanoi. There she was asked to climb into the seat of an anti-aircraft gun. When she arrived back at the U.S. in coolie hat and Vietnamese pajamas, she was greeted with cries of "Hanoi Jane" and accused of being a traitor. And you see her expression there as she was waiting for the planes to come in so she could shoot them down. Jane Fonda at a meeting with American POWs at Hanoi Hilton. And this is a quote from her. "My position on the POW issue has been widely misquoted and taken out of context. What I originally said and have continued to say is that the POWs are lying if they assert it was North Vietnamese policy to torture American prisoners." Jane Fonda. So now she's calling the POWs a liar. Fonda visited American prisoners of war at the Hanoi Hilton and brought back messages from them to their families. When stories of torture of returning POWs were later being publicized by the Nixon administration, Fonda said that those making such claims were hypocrites and liars and pawns, adding about the prisoners she visited. Those were not men who had been tortured. These were not men who had been starved. These were not men who had been brainwashed. In addition, Fonda told the New York Times in 1973, "I'm quite sure there were incidents of torture, but the pilots who were saying it was a policy of the Vietnamese and it was systematic, I believe that's a lie." Now, the North Vietnamese had a tendency to hand select the prisoners they wanted. Out of this visit, one of the many things that Jane Fonda was supposed to have done, she was supposed to have received the Social Security numbers of the prisoners there and gave them back to the North Vietnamese, and some of the prisoners were beat up bad. One of them died, one of them lost his hearing, and so forth. We're going to discuss that a little bit farther along, but we'll keep going on her story right now. William Manchester, the editor of the New Hampshire Union Leader newspaper, called for her to be tried for sedition and shot. Some lawmakers called her action treason. Congress held hearings. They do a lot of that. The Veterans of Foreign Wars passed a resolution calling for her to be prosecuted as a traitor. Perhaps most dramatically, in March of 1973, the Maryland state legislature held a hearing to have Fonda and her films barred from the state of Delaware. William Burkhead, a Democrat from Anne Arundel, said, "I wouldn't want to kill her, but I wouldn't mind if you cut her tongue off," according to a Post story. Fonda became a heroine of the New Left for her activities such as the constitutional rights for American servicemen, Black Panthers, Native American rights, the Vietnam War, the anti-nuclear movement, and women's rights. Her life reflected the uncertainties, confusion, and rapidly changing values which began to rock America in the mid-1960s. To many, she seemed mercurial, contradictory, and driven as a fighter for justice and peace. To others, she was naive, irritating, and anti-American fool. I think she fit on all those. Her cause was so numerous and undiscriminating that Saudi Alinsky, fellow American radical, claimed that Fonda was a hitchhiker on the highway of causes. Kind of like she didn't know which way to go. Shortly after Jane's divorce from Tom Hayden, Ted Turner of Turner Broadcasting started pursuing her. Jane had mixed feelings about Ted Turner. She was aware of his numerous affairs and his manic depression. She finally consented to go out with him. The first time they went out together, Ted explains to Jane that she needed someone just like him that was more successful than her. Her immediate reaction was to back off some. I mean, here's a guy that had a bigger ego than she did. So she just kind of backed him off a little bit. Then she started to reflect on her past and decided to have some more plastic surgery and breast implants done to make herself more seductive. Soon after her surgery, Jane had an affair with an Italian ice hockey that was 16 years her junior. He and Jane visited his mother in Milan, Italy. His mother told him that Jane was too old to give him babies. After returning home, he dropped Jane, injuring her ego. In the meantime, Ted Turner had been sending her flowers and messages. Jane started to believe that their personalities fit, relented, and began seeing Ted again. He attempted to impress her by introducing her to his lifestyle. He took her to the White House where Barbara Bush refused to shake her hand. Yay, Barbara. He took her to the Kremlin, brought her a home in Montana, but continued sleeping with other women. In December of 1991, Ted Turner and Jane Fonda got married. Jane, being the dutiful trophy wife, traveled with Ted all over the world. She stopped expressing her radical opinions and supported Turner. After 8 years of marriage, she had become thin, drawn, and drinking heavily. Ted continued seeing other women. January 4th, 2000, they separated. Jane returned to acting, but occasionally traveled with Ted, who brought her a Montana ranch as a divorce gift. Announcing divorce in 2001, Fonda and Turner both said her becoming a Christian played a role in the breakup. Turner has been quoted as saying, "Christianity is a religion for losers." And the bottom of this picture there, I want to make sure I read this quote. Ted Turner says, "I think it is good that American soldiers are turning their guns on themselves in record numbers." Nice quote from a man who's become a billionaire off of soldiers giving him the right for free enterprise. There's Jane again. Let's look at what Jane Fonda actually did and did not do. There are numerous myths that are not true about Hanoi Jane. But there's a lot of things that she did do that maybe her name kept her from being tried for treason. Before we do that, some of the posters are out there. This is a selection. Some of them I couldn't put on the show. They were a little more risque. I'll forgive Jane Fonda when the Jews forgive Hitler. Jane called home. Jane Fonda, American traitor bitch. The one there in the middle is Jane Fonda headquarters, porta potties. Political wars and scandals come and go, but hating traitor Jane Fonda is forever. Vietnam vets are not Fonda Jane. And of course, some of the urinal stickers that are out there. Hanoi Jane is pro-abortion. Who's the baby killer now? I like that one. Hanoi Jane lied. People died. And some of the nice urinal stickers. I had a whole slew of those one time I used to give out at schools and so forth. The Porta-Johns there is Vietnam Veterans Jane Fonda's Memorial Urinal. Please pause and remember. As you can see, a lot of veterans out there really appreciated there and had bumper stickers everywhere. I'm not fond of Hanoi Jane. How did Jane Fonda get the Hanoi Jane? After Tet in 1968 American victory, the American public's general attitude about the war was changing. The war's continuation prompted widespread protests in the U.S. It was around that time that Fonda focused her political activism solely on the anti-war movement. That's when Walter Cronkite came out and said the war was unwinnable and we should not be there. Up until that time, he was supporting the war, which changed the whole American thought pattern. By that point, she was a prominent movie star, renowned for her performances in critically acclaimed films like Clute, Barefoot in the Park, Barbarella, and They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Fonda dove into protest in the Vietnam War, first with the formation of Free Army Tour, the FTA. That's what they called it, tongue-in-cheek, with actor Donald Sutherland in 1970. FTA was an anti-war show designed to contrast Bob Hope's USO tour, touring military bases on the West Coast and talking to soldiers before they were deployed to Vietnam. In 1972, Fonda went to tour North Vietnam in a controversial trip that would become famous or infamous of her activists, leading to her nickname Hanoi Jane. While in Vietnam, Fonda appeared on 10 radio programs to speak out against the U.S. military's policy in Vietnam and begged pilots to cease bombing non-military targets. It was during that trip that a photograph was taken of her seated on an anti-aircraft gun in Hanoi, making it look like she would shoot down American planes. Fonda's criticism of U.S. leadership caused massive outrage among American officials and war veterans. The Washington Post said some lawmakers saw her protest as treasonous, and the veterans of foreign wars called for Fonda to be tried as a traitor. At one point, the Maryland state legislature considered banning her and her films from the state. Jane Fonda did not merely criticize democratically elected governor of South Vietnam or other dubious powerful corporations that made up the American industrial complex. She sided with the Viet Cong as the revolutionary liberators, and she traveled to Hanoi at a time when North Vietnamese soldiers were killing Americans. While criticizing America, she made complimentary comments about the Soviet Union. She referred to the American POWs as hypocrites and liars over their claims of torture at the hands of North Vietnamese communist jailers. That one right there gets me more than some of the other stuff she did, but moving on. In one of the 10 broadcasts in North Vietnam during her visit, Jane Fonda is giving her impressions at the end of her visit to the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. This is the quote that she made on the air. This is Jane Fonda. During my 2 weeks visit in the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, I've had the opportunity to visit a great many places and speak to a large number of people from all walks of life: workers, peasants, students, artists, and dancers, historians, journalists, film actresses, soldiers, militia girls, members of the women's union writers. I visited the Dam Wak agriculture agriculture co-op, where the silkworms are also raised and thread is made. I visited a textile factory, a kindergarten in Hanoi. The beautiful temple of literature was where I saw traditional dances and heard songs of resistance. I also saw unforgettable ballet about the guerrilla training bees to south to attack enemy soldiers. The bees were dancing by women, and they did their job well. In the shadow of the Temple of Literature, I saw Vietnamese actors and actresses perform the second act of Arthur Miller's play, All My Sons, and this was very moving to me. The fact that artists here are translating and performing American plays while U.S. imperialists are bombing their country. I cherish the memory of the blushing militia girls on the roof of their factory, encouraging one of their sisters as she sang a song praising the blue skies of Vietnam. These women who are so gentle and poetic, whose voices are so beautiful, but who, when American planes are bombing their city, become good fighters. I cherish the way a farmer evacuated from Hanoi without hesitating offered me and American their best individual bomb shelter while U.S. bombs fell nearby. The daughter and I, in fact, shared the shelter wrapped in each other's arms, cheek against cheek. It was on the road back from Nam Dinh, where I had witnessed the systematic destruction of civilian targets, schools, hospitals, pagodas, the factories, houses, and the dike system. As I left the United States 2 weeks ago, Nixon was again telling the American people that he was winding down the war. But in the rebel streets of Nam Dinh, his words echoed with the sinister of a true killer. And like the young Vietnamese woman I held in my arms, clinging to me tightly, and I pressed my cheek against hers, I thought, this is a war against Vietnam, perhaps, but the tragedy is America's. One of the things I have learned beyond a shadow of doubt since being in this country is that Nixon will never be able to break the spirit of these people. He'll never be able to turn Vietnam North and South into a neo-colony of the United States by bombing, by invading, by attacking in any way. One has only to go into the countryside and listen to the peasants describe the lives they led before the revolution to understand why every bomb that is dropped only strengthens the determination to resist. I've spoken to many peasants who talked about the days when their parents had to sell themselves to landlords as virtual slaves, when there were very few schools and much illiteracy, inadequate medical care, when they were not masters of their own lives. But now, Despite the bombs, despite the crimes being created by committing against them by Richard Nixon, these people own their land, build their own schools. The children learning literacy, illiteracy is being wiped out. There's no more prostitution as there was during the time when there was a French colony. In other words, the people have taken power into their own hands and they are controlling their own lives. Oh, no, come on, naive. After 4,000 years of struggle against nature and foreign invaders, in the last 25 years prior to the revolution of struggling against French colonialism, I think that the people of Vietnam are about to compromise. I don't think the people of Vietnam are about to compromise in any way, shape, or form about the freedom and independence of their country. I think Richard Nixon would do well to read Vietnamese history, particularly their poetry, and particularly stuff written by Ho Chi Minh. That was the speech she made there in Hanoi to the people of Hanoi. General Vo Nguyen Giap, he was the supreme leader of North Vietnamese Army, told CBS in 1989 interview, "Do not forget the war was brought into the living rooms of the American people. The most important results of the Tet Offensive was it made you de-escalate the bombing, and it brought you to the negotiating table. It was, therefore, a victory. The war was fought on many fronts. At that time, the most important one was the American public opinion." What he's saying there, folks, is the news media started going negative and printing all kinds of negative stuff, and the American people basically helped them win the war there. More to the point, in a 1995 interview with the Wall Street Journal, Rui Tien, a communist contemporary of Giap and Ho Chi Minh, who was serving as an NVA colonel assigned to the general staff at the time Saigon fell, had this to say about the left media and Soviet puppets. The left media, oh, they were talking about that in 1995. Puppets like Hanoi, Jane Fonda, and John Kerry. That's him in his North Vietnamese uniform. They were essential to our strategy. Support of the war from our rear was completely secure while the American rear was vulnerable. Every day, our leadership would listen to the world news or the radio to follow the growth of the American anti-war movement. Visited Hanoi by people like Jane Fonda, former Attorney General Ramsey Clark, and ministers gave us confidence that we should hold on in the face of battle reverses. Buey stated further, those people represented the conscience of America. The conscience of America was part of its wars-making capability, and we were turning that power into our favor. America lost because of its democracy, through dissent and protest, to lose the ability to mobilize to win. Some more Jane Fonda loved ones. Even today, veterans remember being betrayed by Jane Fonda. The left corner says, Jane Fonda said she lacked the courage to speak about Harvey Weinstein. Apparently, she found the courage to do this, sit at the anti-aircraft gun. Jane Fonda sitting in the aircraft bottom left. I don't regret going to Vietnam. Hanoi, Jane Fonda on aiding and abetting American enemies. And then the wall. Look who's out protesting again. I guess she thinks the statute of limitations on treason has run out. Those are the people's names on the wall, talking about Jane. Let me give you some quotes that Jane Fonda did during that period of time. This alone should get her for treason. I would think if you understood what communism was, you would hope, you would pray on your knees that someday would become communist. Jane Fonda, 1970, addressing to Michigan State University. She made that same comment at Duke University sometime around that same time. If Americans weren't so ignorant about the horrors of communism, I would not be worried. Communism killed more than fascism, but how many Joe Stalin movies have you seen? Bet you've seen plenty of Hitler, though. If Americans weren't so modest about ending the Cold War and defeating communism, I would not be worried. We couldn't move on from that one fast enough. So we need to quit fighting communism. Communism is on the rise. Our Constitution could be in jeopardy. In it now before it gets ugly. Let's speak about educate Americans while they still have a free press and free vote. I believe we have to strive for a transition to a socialist society, all the way to communism. I mean, I think we should. I think we should all study what the word means, and I believe that if everyone knew what the word meant, we would all be on our knees praying that we would as soon as possible be able to live within a communist structure. Sound like some of the politicians now. I don't know if a country, America, where the people are so ignorant of reality and of history, if you can call that a free world. We've got to establish a socialist economic structure that will limit private profit-oriented businesses. This is the same woman who married Ted Turner. I viewed I wouldn't get married until someone gave me one good reason. No one ever did, but I got married anyway. We understand that Nixon's aggression against Vietnam is a racist aggression, that the American war in Vietnam is a racist war of white man's war. We deplore that you are being used as cannon fodder for U.S. imperialism. We've seen photographs of American bombs and anti-personnel weapons being dropped wantonly, accidentally perhaps, on our heads, on the heads of your comrades. That was when she was in North Vietnam, of course. Jane Fonda, this is one of the many rumors out there that it is not true. So let me get it to you now. What I'm getting ready to give you, this part is not true. It did not happen. It's still persisting on the internet. I see it almost weekly. Jane Fonda and Ted Turner were rebuffed at a Montana restaurant. The summer of rumor, like email. The story claims that a caller to a radio station witnessed an encounter between Jane Fonda, her then husband Ted Turner, and a restaurant owner in Montana. The couple arrived for dinner, but was told there was a 45-minute wait. They called the manager and asked him, "Do you know who I am?" They asked for the owner and tried to sing with him. He's alleged to have told them he was a Vietnam vet and they were not welcome in his establishment. The rumor closes by identifying the name of the restaurant in which this alleged to have happened. The truth. This story has been circulating for quite a while, and we never found any identifying details of substantiation for it. It circulated first without any identification of the restaurant in which it was supposed to have happened, but this version does name the restaurant. We called the folks at Sir Scott's Oasis Steakhouse in Montana. They said nothing of this nature ever happened. It's constructed of a couple of known facts. One is that Jane Fonda is viewed by many Americans, especially many Vietnam veterans, as a traitor because of her controversial visits to North Vietnam during the war. Another is that she owned a property in Montana, which is the one that Ted Turner gave her. This is from a book, Aid and Comfort, by Henry Mark Holzer and Erica Holzer. This work, I would highly recommend you get it. I think you'll enjoy it. This work investigates Fonda's activities in North Vietnam and argues that she could have been indicted for treason, that it would have been enough evidence to take the case to jury, that she could have been convicted, and that a conviction probably would have been upheld on appeal. It also considers Fonda's early life and the effect it had on her behavior and the beliefs in her later years. Her audience of American POWs who were forced by the Vietnamese to listen to her broadcasts, condemning them as war criminals. Her arrival in Vietnam and how it was viewed by American servicemen and civilians. The crime of treason throughout history and the only congressional inquiry into her actions, which resulted in the government's basically looking it over, just forgetting it. This is some of the stories that are out there right now. As you can see from the book, that she should have been tried for treason. I think if her name hadn't been Fonda and everybody was so beloved Henry Fonda so much, I don't know. Even today, people doing crazy things, and it just seems to get okay. That's okay. Hanoi Jane Fonda. This is some of the messages out there on the email and internet and so forth. Looks like Hanoi Jane may be honored as the 100 women of the century. Jane Fonda remembered. Unfortunately, many have forgotten, and still countless others have known how Ms. Fonda betrayed not only the ideals of our country, but the men who served and sacrificed during the Vietnam War. There are a few things that I have strong visceral reactions to, but Jane Fonda's participation in what I believe to be blatant treason is one of them. Part of my conviction comes from exposure up to those who suffered her attention. The first part of this is from an F-4E pilot. The pilot's name is Jerry Driscoll, a river rat. In 1978, the commandant of the USA Survival School was a former POW in Holo prison, or which we call the Hanoi Hilton. Okay. This is where the story that was supposed to happen to Driscoll. Dragged from a stinking cesspool of a cell, clean, fed, and dressed in clean pajamas, or to describe for a visiting American peace activist the lenient and humane treatment he'd received. He spat at Miss Fonda, was clubbed and dragged away. During the subsequent beating, he fell forward upon the camp commandant's feet, actually pulling the man's shoe off, which sent the officer berserk. In 1978, the Air Force colonel still suffered from double vision, which permanently ended his flying days from the Vietnamese colonel's frenzied application of a wooden baton. From 1983 to 85, Colonel Larry Carrigan, with the 347th F4, he flew F4Es. He spent 6 years in the Hilton, his first 3 of which he was missing in action. His wife lived on faith that he was still alive. His group, too, got the clean, fed, clothed routine in preparation for a peace delegation to visit. They, however, had time and devised a plan to get word to the world that they still survived. Each man secreted a tiny piece of paper with his Social Security on it in the palm of his hand. When paraded before Ms. Fonda and Cameron, she walked the line shaking their hands and asking little encouraging snippets like, "Aren't you sorry, you bomb babies? Are you grateful for the humane treatment from your benevolent captors?" Believing this had to be an act, they each pawned her their sliver of paper. She took them all without missing a beat. At the end of the line, once the camera stopped rolling, she shocked the disbelief of the POWs. She turned to the officer in charge and handed a little pile. 3 men died from the subsequent beatings. Colonel Carrigan was almost number 4. For years after their release, a group of determined former POWs, including Colonel Carrigan, tried to bring Ms. Fonda and others up on charges of treason. I don't know what they had used, but the charge of negligent homicide due to depraved indifference would also seem appropriate. Her obvious granting of aid and comfort to the enemy alone should have been sufficient to the treason count. However, to date, Jane Fonda has never been formally charged with anything and continues to enjoy the privileged life of such rich and famous. Okay. Part of our shortfall is ignorance. Most don't know her actions ever took place. Thought you might appreciate the knowledge. Most of you probably already know this by now. Only addition I might add to this sentiment is to remember the satisfaction of relieving myself in the urinal at some airbase or other where zaps of Hanoi Jane's face had been applied. This is some of the things out there on the internet. To whom it concerned. I was a civilian economic development advisor in Vietnam and was captured by the North Vietnamese communists in South Vietnam in 1968. and held for over 5 years. I spent 27 months in solitary confinement, 1 year in a cage in Cambodia, and 1 year in the black box in Hanoi. My North Vietnamese captors deliberately poisoned and murdered a female missionary, a nurse in a leprosarium in Ban Ma Thuot, South Vietnam, whom I buried in the jungle near the Cambodian border. At one time, I was weighing approximately 90 pounds. My normal weight is 170. We were Jane Fonda's war criminals. When Jane Fonda was in Hanoi, I was asked by the camp's communist political officer, would I be willing to meet with Jane Fonda? I said yes, for I would like to tell her about the treatment that we POWs were receiving, which was far different from the treatment purported by the North Vietnamese and parroted by Jane Fonda as humane and lenient. Because of this, I spent 3 days on a rocky floor on my knees with outstretched arms, with a piece of steel placed on my hands and beaten with a bamboo cane every time my arms dipped. I had the opportunity to meet with Jane Fonda for a couple of hours after I was released. I asked her if she would be willing to debate me on TV. She did not answer me. Her former husband, Tom Hayden, had answered for her. She was mind controlled by her husband. This does not exemplify someone who should be honored as 100 years of great women. Although I was released, I was asked what I thought of Jane Fonda and the anti-aircraft, anti-war movement. I said that I held Joan Baez's husband in very high regards, for he thought the war was wrong, burned his draft card, and went to prison in protest. If other war protesters took the same route, I would have brought our judicial system to a halt and end the war much earlier. There wouldn't be as many of the summer black granite called the Vietnam Memorial. This is a mockery. This is the American way. Jane Fonda, on the other hand, chose to be a traitor and went to Hanoi, wore the uniform, propagandized for the communists, and urged American soldiers to desert. As we were being tortured and some of the POWs murdered, she called us liars. After her heroes, the North Vietnamese communists, took over South Vietnam, they systematically murdered 80,000 South Vietnamese political prisoners. May their souls rest in peace on her forever. Shame, shame. History is a heavy word in the hand of those who refuse to forget it. Please take time to read and forward to as many people as possible, which eventually end up on her computer, and she needs to know that we will never forget. Lest we forget 100 years of great women, Jane Fonda should never be considered. Here's the claims out there. POWs were beaten for refusing to cooperate or meet with Jane Fonda during her visit. Status is true. Only the final antecedent of the Hanoi Jane email recounts the experience of a POW who agreed to meet with Fonda but announced to his captors that he planned on telling how hard conditions in North Vietnamese prison camps really were. Because of this, the narrative continues. I spent 3 days on a rocky floor on my knees with outstanding arms, with a piece of steel placed on my hands and beaten with a bamboo cane every time my arms dipped. These words were written by Michael Binge, a civilian advisor who captured by the Viet Cong in 1968 and held as a POW for 5 years. When I contacted him, Binge said that True was indeed his own, and it was true. I have met Michael Binge and talked with him. His story is true. The other stories are not. Titled Shame on Jane, Binge's original statement on the matters was posted online in April 1999 by the Advocacy and Intelligence Network for POWs and MIAs. The text was clearly cribbed from the author for another website and combined with the facetious antecedent above to create Hanoi Jane email that still circulates to this day. There's Michael Binge in Tiger Cage he used to travel around with. Next, okay. This is from non-POW's President Mike McGrath. He's got a great book out there who shows pictures that he drew of the different tortures. But this is the message he wants to get out there to all Vietnam vets and everybody who has listened to and believed the emails that went out about the stories out there. And this is the message he put out. I thought you needed to see a message that I sent to some folks who were establishing web pages with completely false stories which had been submitted to them as true stories. They agreed to stop after learning that they had received bogus information. And I hope some of the Vietnam vets sites out there on Facebook and so forth get a chance to hear this and read it. Non-POWs names of Jerry Driscoll, Larry Carrigan, and A.J. Myers have been connected falsely with the Jane Fonda stories. If any of you see these false stories passed around the net from group to group, please send a copy of this message to the sender and try to get this nonsense and slander of McCain, Driscoll, Carrigan, AJ stopped. Thanks, Mike McGrath, president of non-POWs. There is a bogus story floating around about Larry Carrigan, Jane Fonda, to the POWs, death of POWs, strips of paper, notes given to Jane, and so forth. I just thought that you should know this is all bullcrap propagated by someone for some unknown purpose, probably to bolster some hate against the traitorous bitch. They said which. I'm not defending her. We all hate her as much as the next person, but you need to get your stories straight. Jerry Driscoll is my secretary treasurer. I just talked to him. This is going back to Mike McGrath. Same for A.J. Myers. They had nothing to do with the article attributed to them. They asked that we get their names off that bunch of crap. Tonight I talked with Larry Carrigan. He asked that we get the name off all that crap as well. He never left a room to talk to anyone like that. No torture or beatings to see Fonda. He was living with Bud Day, John McCain, and a bunch of hard-nosed resistors during the Fonda visit. A lot of witnesses. If you want to question him or them, Larry was never near Jane. So he couldn't have been beat up because of her. He was beat up anyway. There was never any POWs killed on account of Jane. Did anyone ever provide name of those tortured fellows? The story by the notes he has a nice theatric touch, but no such thing has ever happened. The only ones who met with Jane willingly, to my knowledge, was CDR Gene Weber and Lieutenant Colonel Ed Miller. One non-POW was forced to go before the Fonda delegation, and I think he was only allowed to sit at a table for a photo opportunity. I doubt he even got a chance to talk to her, let alone slip her a note. To my knowledge, the worst that happened to the rest of us was we had to listen to the camp radio, Radio Hanoi and Hanoi Hana, with the Fonda propaganda. It pissed us off, but I doubt you can call that torture. So if you get a chance to shut this story down to the group we are forwarding it, please do so. You can cut and paste this paragraph if you want to. Doubters can come to meet me if they need to. Mike McGrath, president of non-POWs, POW June 30th, 67 to March 4th, 1973. So this is what she did do. Jane financed the Black Panthers, enabled them to break the law. Jane helped finance the Winter Soldier movement, which labeled Vietnam veterans as baby killers. Jane committed treasonous acts both in North and Vietnam. And I'm not going to read all the things under her picture there. So Jane Fonda, an American actress and daughter of an American icon, traveled to Hanoi, North Vietnam, and allowed herself to be photographed laughing while still sitting at a communist anti-aircraft gun like she was having a good time waiting to shoot Americans down. And you can see up there, politicians and war scandals come and go, but hating Jane Fonda is forever. Their signs are still out there everywhere. Jane openly sided with the communists and highly criticized ally South Vietnam government. During the time of war, she aided and abetted the enemy by going to Hanoi, North Vietnam, and allowing herself to use for propaganda purposes and making 10 recorded statements for continued support of the communists. Jane claimed that the United States was purposely bombing women and children along the dikes around Hanoi that would kill hundreds of thousands. On Bataan, returning from Hanoi, she claimed that American POWs were being well treated, and if they said differently, they were being tortured, they were lying. Jane's ordered anti-aircraft photo, her reaction to it, and then we're going to finish up. Here's my best honest recollection of what took place. Someone I don't remember who leads me towards the gun. I sit down, still laughing, still applauding. It has nothing to do with where I'm sitting. I hardly even think about where I'm sitting. The camera flash, I get up and I just start to walk back to the car with the translator. The implications of what has just happened hits me. Oh my God, it's going to look like I was trying to shoot down U.S. planes. I've pleaded with him. You have to be sure those photographs are not published. Please, you can't let them be published. I am assured they will be taken care of. I don't know what else to do. It is possible that the Vietnamese had it all planned. I will never know. If they did, can I really blame them? The buck stops here. I was used. I allowed it to happen. It was my mistake, and I have paid and continue to pay a heavy price for it. And this is her apology she made to Barbara Walters. I would like to say again to men who were in Vietnam, who I hurt or whose pain I caused to be to deepen because of things that I said or did, she began. I was trying to help end the killing and the war. But there were times when I was thoughtless and careless about it, and I'm very sorry that I hurt them. And I want to apologize to them and their families. I don't know how you can go back and apologize for something like that. Why does it matter? It matters because it's happening again today. She hurt a lot of people in the process. She sounded like a young lady that had so many personal problems that she tried to escape and tried to do something good, but all the things that she tried to do good were didn't work that well. I just wanted to, before we leave, I want to announce that a Vietnam vet, a friend, a journalist, an actor, motorcyclist, father, husband, Vietnam vet, who used to write for our local News and Observer, a special column, kind of a homely column. He was a good old country boy, even though he was a little on the liberal side. Member of Vietnam Veterans of America, North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Inc. of America. Good guy, traveled with us. He passed away last week. The world will be a real loss for Dennis Rogers, and we'll just remember him. Our next show will be the 26th of August. We're going to be talking about a man who went in to rescue 12-man team with nothing but a K-bar knife and a medical bag. When he put the last man on the helicopter that he was able to rescue, he had been wounded 37 times. He was literally
spoiler alert.
He was literally holding his intestines when he put him in the thing. So I'm going to say good night, and we'll see you next show. Take care of yourself. Be careful out there with the virus. Good night.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.